Welcome back. The New York Community Trust recently received a total of $7.7 million in grants that will be distributed among 39 nonprofit organizations. These organizations work toward the goal of building and sustaining healthy, rewarding lives in New York. The grants aim to support a wide range of community needs, from assisting cancer patients to empowering women of color to establish their own businesses. Deputy Vice President for Grants at New York Community Trust, Irfan Hasan, joins me to discuss. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, can you start off by telling us a little bit more about the New York Community Trust and what the organization does?
Sure. So the New York Community Trust is what we call a community foundation. We have been around for 100 years. We're turning 100 this year.
Wow, congratulations.
Pretty good for 100. We are a place where generous New Yorkers come together to make New York better while they're living and also through their legacies. We're about 3.2 billion in size in assets, and last year in 2023 we gave out about $200 million in grants.
Now, how does the organization determine which other, nonprofits or organizations in the region that they want to fund? Because I can imagine that is a big task. So, what is that process like?
Sure. So, I think for all your listeners, what is really important to know is we have an open application process. That is both the good news and the challenging news. The good news is any nonprofit can apply, and we serve New York City, Westchester, and Long Island. Nonprofits can apply. We focus on a whole range of projects, and we try to make the best decisions possible to ultimately make sure that New York continues to be a great place.
Now, as I mentioned, the Trust was recently awarded $7.7 million to 39 nonprofit organizations around New York. Could you elaborate on the factors that led to this amazing grant? And also, by the way, congratulations, because that is also an amazing thing. Whenever there's just more resources to support more communities, that's always an amazing thing. So congratulations. But what factors led to the grant?
Sure. So we have what they call an endowment through generous New Yorkers who have left us money. And that $7.7 million that we were able to give away to other nonprofits came from what we have been given over the years. So it wasn't just one $7.7 million that came to us and then we gave out. It's money that we have and we continue to give out. The trust makes grants 5 times a year. Our board reviews recommendations that the staff put forward, and the February grants were part of that group. We're going to be giving another round in April, another round in June, October, and in December.
Now, could you highlight a few organizations that you may think of or causes that will benefit from this grant?
Sure. So the two that kind of come to mind that I think are just really, really nifty. One is Freedom Agenda. It's an organization that is really working to end the challenges of Rikers Island. We live in New York City. New York City is huge, and Rikers Island, I think, unfortunately, is a place that really needs to be reformed, perhaps even shut down. And Freedom Agenda is really helping to move that work forward. There's another grant that we made to people-oriented cities, which is really looking at how do you make sure that the built environment stays good and healthy for all of us. There are just lots of examples. We've been making grants around cancer treatment and support for people. There was a large tranche of grants in the February grants, a little over 1 million, that are helping people with cancer get the services that they need, whole range of services. So just a few examples. I could go on for.
Well, that's amazing, and it's great to know that this stuff is already being put in work.
Yeah.
Now, can you provide some insight into the trust criteria and considerations when allocating grants to organizations?
That is both the most fun part of the job of being at a foundation and also the hardest. We have guidelines that our board sets for us, that our board approves for us, and we follow those. And broadly speaking, we look at efforts that look to either make policy change, advance a system or a sector to make things better writ large, and that are addressing a pressing need. Our guidelines are pretty broad, and the fact that, again, we have an open application, it allows us to hear from the community as to what is needed. And then we go through and figure out, well, where is the best sort of bang for the buck, so to speak.
Now, how does the trust prioritize diversity in its decision-making processes related to grant selection and allocation?
Great question. New York City is the most diverse city in the world. And when we make grants to reflect what New York City is about. So certainly we look at organizations that are led by people of color. We look at organizations that may be working in immigrant communities. We look at organizations that work people who may have disabilities. One of the grants in February was a continuing effort around Access-a-Ride and making sure that people with disabilities can get around our city easily. So we really, really focus in on what makes up New York City, which is really, really diverse, and try to match that in our grant making.
And then can you just talk about, why it's so important to highlight and support marginalized communities with funding?
We live in a world where there is inequality, and that is just, I think, a fact. If we can do wealth transference, get people who need resources, the resources from people who left money to make things better, we've just got to do it, and that's what we ultimately are about.
Now, how does the trust ensure that it's connecting with the affected communities and addressing their specific needs?
So the trust has if I can kind of toot our own horn for a little while, an amazing staff. And our staff are New Yorkers, whether they are individuals who were born here, raised here, or people who chose to make New York their home. And we live in all 5 boroughs, we live in 8 downstate counties, so we're out and about all the time and getting to know our communities. We also really, really take seriously the fact that they're nonprofits who are doing the hard work, and they inform us a lot of what needs to be done.
Now, what measures does the trust employ to evaluate the effectiveness of grants allocated to local organizations?
We take the lead from the organization, actually. When organizations submit a proposal to us for a project, we ask them, well, what is it that you seek to achieve? And that's sort of what we used to measure. Now, because we look at efforts that relate to changing systems, to advancing policy, the change might not happen very quickly. So we try to figure out some metrics that are viable, and that's what we look at. And that's what we wait to hear from the organizations as to how they're doing with that.
And can you just, you mentioned, kind of the relationship and, just the close contact you have with a lot of these organizations, which I think is so important, because I think sometimes we think that people just, they'll just give an organization money and then they disappear. They don't really hear until it's maybe a 6-month update.
Yeah.
But, you're working with the organizations. Can you talk about the importance
Sure.
of that?
Sure. So I think we try to find a balance of being involved but not being in their business, because they're the ones that are doing the work, and the last thing they need is somebody like me calling every week and saying, so how is it going? Tell me what's happening. So we set up times where we might check in, we wait for reports, but I think the real important part is that we trust that the money that we are giving to organizations, they will do the very best possible. And then we wait to hear where the results are.
Now, a major goal outlined for the grant is to improve the quality of lives for New Yorkers. What does that mean, and what does that look like for the New York Community Trust?
I'll give 2 examples from 2 of the grants that we made. There was a grant that we made to Cancer Care. Cancer Care is an organization that works with people who have cancer, and making life better sometimes can mean getting the financial assistance to make that co-payment so you can get your next dose of chemotherapy. And Cancer Care helps with that. It's a small thing, $50, but it's critical if you're getting chemo. All the way to something far more systemic, a grant to New York Lawyers for Public Interest around making sure that the transportation system for people with disabilities continues to become even more accessible. That's a much different kind of lift, but that will make quality of life so much better for people who may have disabilities.
No, and I love that you're explaining this because it shows the range of, how you're affecting so many different New Yorkers, and it's all so very important. So thank you for sharing that. Now, what long-term impact does the trust hope to achieve with its funding, and what specific changes or improvements are anticipated with recent funding?
So ultimately, I think our goal is to make New York a good place for everybody. And because New York is so vibrant, so changing, new people are coming in, new ideas are happening here. We're constantly trying to stay up to date with, well, what is the next thing that needs to happen to continue to make New York a good place for all, whether you're living in the top of a penthouse or whether you just got off a bus from the southern border. So it really is sort of making sure that New York remains a vibrant, welcoming, and good place to live.
Now, I want to talk about, just because I think that's kind of the theme, is supporting local organization and nonprofits. What are some ways, of course, your organization is doing it, but what are some ways that everyday New Yorkers can support their local and nonprofit organizations?
There are a few ways I think that folks can do it. Volunteer, find a place locally where you can spend a few hours, whether it is then getting to know your neighbors, getting to know an issue, something like that. You can certainly give money, and every cent counts. The New York Community Trust has been built up by regular New Yorkers who've left money. So it's not all millionaires. It can be school teachers, taxi drivers, you name it. And then the last thing I would say is sort of, it's a hard thing to do, but say kind of be kind and look around what's happening, because New York has so much happening. I mean, any block in any borough just is teeming with life and activity, and absorb that, learn from it, and give back to it.
Right. And I agree 100% that there's so many ways that we could support what's happening in our community, because it really is a community. So, thank you so much for joining us and kind of highlighting that and talking a little bit more about the amazing work your organization does.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To learn more about the New York Community Trust, please go to their website, www.nycommunitytrust.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on the Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Hemick on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.